Welcome to the Health of Young Stands virtual symposium presentation on silviculture records. If you are looking for something as exciting as death cap mushrooms or murder hornets in British Columbia, you got the wrong presentation. So we're here to talk about silviculture records. So please grab a cup of coffee. It'll be about 22 minutes and I'll go through it. My name is Dan Turner. I work in the Office of the Chief Forester Division of the Ministry of Forests, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, and Rural Development. And I'll take you through a little silviculture records in the context of young stands in BC, Health of Young Stands Symposium. Cheers. Why do we care about silviculture records? Well, these records provide us the stand level treatment history and treatment outcomes for millions of hectares of Crown land in British Columbia, including all harvested stands with licensee obligations to reforest and post-natural disturbance stands managed by government-funded programs. In all, the managed area in BC, forest managed area in BC, is approximately 22 million hectares, which is 23% of the gross. This is considered or labeled the timber harvesting land base. It's a fair chunk of the province. And of that 22 million hectares, approximately 6.8 million hectares has been harvested in the last 32 years. And how do we know this? We know this because of silviculture records. And again, why do we care? It's because these records provide us the stand level treatment history and treatment outcomes for such a large portion of the province today. So a brief outline of what I plan on discussing in this presentation. I'll start things off with a little history lesson, about 4 minutes of down history lane on the eras of silviculture data collection, and we'll provide a little insight into what information is and is not included in silviculture records through time. And also for the Health of Young Stand Symposium, I want to break this presentation into both the young stand part of what information silviculture records has on young stands, and it's millions of hectares of the treatments that occurred and the outcomes. So provide a brief look at what information is available. And then also silviculture records are also a repository for forest health information as collected in silviculture surveys. So I'll go through what forest health information is available in our silviculture records as well to wrap up the presentation. We have a long history of forest management in British Columbia, and we therefore have a long history of silviculture record keeping as well. The history that we have tracked in ministry systems and available on the web date back to 1911. We have annual silviculture reports dating from 1911 all the way up to 1976 that are summarized at the regional level. So these are treatments that occurred by year, by region. These records are largely not of much value to us today because after 1976, these records were kept at a stand level. So that allowed us to roll up these summaries from a stand level maybe to a licensee level or a license or a management unit or a district or a region or the province. So we can scale our summaries. The summaries are not all that scalable in these really old annual silviculture reports. So our first computerized record keeping system was turned on in 1976, and that was at the stand level for all non-TFL Crown lands. So this is only capturing a portion of our treatment history in this first system in 1976. And from 1976 to 1987, again, I have to stress that only a portion of the treatments are recorded. And in 1987, a really important, and I'll probably touch on it a number of times through this presentation, really important thing happened, and that was a reforestation to a free-growing standard was made a legal obligation of harvesting on Crown land. And when that happened, quickly a new system of silviculture reporting was brought in. MLSys, the Major Licensee Silviculture Information System, was turned on. And this is where licensees submitted forms to district offices, and district offices entered those forms into an electronic system. This included all areas harvested on TFL and TSA lands after October the 1st, 1987. So relatively complete. There were a few other funding sources that weren't included at that time that were caught up a little later. So MLSys was turned on in 1988. Then in 1994, ISIS was turned on. And I mentioned that there were these other funding sources that were not tracked. Well, ISIS attempted to bring in some of that information. And this was some government-funded reporting, as well as some of the records from prior to 1987. So it was cleaning up that era from 1976 to 1987 a little bit, and those were put into this separate system, ISIS, Integrated Silviculture Information System. Then in 1997, all the MLSys and ISIS reporting was all grouped together and put into one system. So ISIS now carried all of the stand level silviculture reporting all in one place. Then same thing happened in 2003. A new system, Results, replaced ISIS, and then in turn got the information from MLSys as well. So all that information was put into one central repository, and that newest system was Results from 2003, and Results is still the system today. So an important date in Results, well, it was turned on, I believe, in 2004, open and accepting information from licensees, but it wasn't until 2007 that all the functionality was made mandatory in Results, and namely it was the Results forest cover spatial data that was made a mandatory reporting requirement in 2007. And that's important for this conversation because it's that forest cover reporting is where forest health information is submitted. So this gives us a spatial representation of where those where that reporting occurred. So now Results, because it received all the stand level information from those previous systems and has been accepting submissions since 2003, there's now over 300,000 silviculture openings in the system. So it's a rather large Oracle database that receives 150,000 web hits per week. It has 125 users per hour during working hours. It has another stat up to 450 submissions of spatial, or that's your XML, GML files or text files, up to 450 submissions of those per hour at peak times. So it's a rather large system with lots of information, and it is an Oracle database that can be accessed through many means, and I'll touch on that in another slide or two. Over the next few slides, I'll provide you with a few examples of what treatment information is available in Results. And please be mindful that this information is reported at the stand level in Results and recorded in our silviculture records at the stand level, but is summarized here for the province, really just because it makes for a better presentation. So here is the summary of harvested area by fiscal year since 1987. And I go back, and most of the summaries I'll be providing here are back to 1987, because back to our history prior to 1987, our records are not complete. So lots of our records will just be summarized after 1987. So if you ever are using Results information, please be mindful of that. So this brown area is the area harvested. We've averaged about 207,000 hectares a year since 1987, and we see some drops in 2009, 2008-9, and again in 2019 because of market conditions. Now, we can overlay or compare our harvested area by fiscal year and compare that to our reforested area by fiscal year. And in here, you'll see with the black line being reforested, we average about 221,000 hectares reforested by year. So first off, why do we have a difference of approximately 15,000 hectares? Well, that's largely due to government-funded programs, rehabilitating naturally disturbed areas or areas harvested or disturbed prior to 1987. So we always seem to have a little bit more reforested than we do harvested. And we also see another noticeable trend between harvesting and reforestation is where we see a bump in harvesting, we usually see a subsequent bump in reforestation 2 years later. And that's because we have a regeneration or a planting delay post-harvest. Planting anywhere from 1 to 3 years, typically around 2, as well as our natural regeneration. And typically we see natural regeneration anywhere from 3 to 7 years. So this chart is a more detailed look or a deeper dive into reforestation. Recognize this same black line from the reforestation line that was put on the harvesting. It's the same black line, but now it's split into what type of regeneration or reforestation occurred in those areas. And we see some trends over time. The first one is that we can clearly see is the darker green is areas planted using orchard source seed. So that'll be our A-class seed in British Columbia. And we get more and more over time. We also see important to note, natural regeneration, and that's the light beige brown down at the bottom of the chart. Typically we see about 20% provincially of our regeneration is through natural regeneration and not planting. Some of those natural areas will be planted with a little bit of fill planting, the way this analysis was done, but for the most part it's dependent on the natural ingress of local trees. Also important to note is our delay in natural regeneration reporting, because our regeneration surveys and subsequent forest cover reporting don't occur until those trees have had a time to germinate and grow enough and be counted. And that typically takes 3 to 7 years. So natural regeneration, we have a delay being 2019 back to 2012 before we start seeing the natural regeneration reported. Whereas planting, we get the planting reported up just months after some of our harvesting, but typically about 1.5 to 2 years. We'll get our planting reporting in pretty quick. So it's also results that allows us to identify the size as well as the spatial location of harvested areas. So we have that information at the stand level since 1987, pretty much complete. Prior to 1987, again, we have sporadic information on the spatial location and the size of those treatments. But here's just a summary of the cut block size over time. And surprisingly, since 2004 through into the mountain pine beetle epidemic in the interior, there isn't much of a bump in cut block size, which was a little surprising to me when I generated this slide. So I decided to take it to the next step and break it down by region. Well, pretty consistent reduction in the average cut block size in the coast area, where we started at about 30 hectares, and now in 2019 fiscal year reporting, we're down to 13, I believe. The south area somewhat follows the provincial average. So we really see a mountain pine beetle bump from 2004 in the average cut block size in the north. Okay, so that makes sense. So rolling it up at the province was a little misleading to me. So decided to dig down to the next level. And within the north, of course, we can dig down further to the district, to the management unit, TSAs or TFLs, to the licensee, dig down and summarize even further, right down to the stand level. So from the stand level up or from the province down, we have lots of information to support our decision making here. And the last of these treatment summaries is species composition. So this brings in several sources of information to compare the treatment of what species were planted to what species were identified in our free-growing survey from the total stems to what species were identified in the free-growing survey of the free-growing countable stems. And then comparing all those to a whole nother system, HBS, our harvest billing system. So what was actually harvested as a species composition. So roll in all that up to the provincial level, we can see trends of what was harvested compared to what was planted, and comparing that to what we achieved at the time of free growing, at the time the free growing obligation was met. So there's a lot of power in the information that we have. Again, this is rolled up to the provincial level. Here's an example of rolling it down to the, or up to the management unit level for the North Island timber supply area. These summaries can be completed for the province, districts, regions, management units, right down to licensees and or stand level information. I'll now be shifting away from the treatment information that we have in our silviculture records to the forest health information that we currently have in our silviculture records. The reason we have forest health information is because of that obligation to reforest a stand in all harvesting after 1987 on Crown land. And what was deemed the requirement was to create a free growing stand, and that was defined as a stand of healthy trees of a commercially valuable species, etc., etc. But it really focuses on the word healthy in that requirement to establish a free growing stand. Healthy was then defined in 1988 is that it is free of unacceptable levels of forest health damage. Now, what damage agents, how do you survey those, how do you count those? That's all summarized in our silviculture survey manual. So what you'll find is you will not have forest health information reported prior to 1988. So that all came in about because of that free growing stand definition and requirement in 1988. Our silviculture surveys and our subsequent silviculture records were designed to measure the achievement of an obligation. Again, it's back to that definition of healthy for a free growing stand in 1988. The objective of that was not for forest health. That was for the obligation, the achievement of the obligation. Another thing to be aware of when looking at forest health information in our silviculture records that it's often collected in a very young stand. At the time of regeneration, anywhere from 1 to 7 years, or at the time of free growing, anywhere from 7 to 20 years of age. That may be too early for the detection of many of our forest health damage agents. And probably very important is damage agent detection is not easy. Lots of training is required, and we have lots of silviculture we have lots of forest professionals running around the forest that are trained and certified or reporting to a certified individual for silviculture surveys, but it's not easy. Lots of training is required, so we may not have consistent detection across our silviculture plots. And then we also have the potential for a low number of samples per opening. And this all leads to it's important to understand the sample design of our silviculture surveys and how that relates to the end use of the information. But I don't want to be all doom and gloom. There is a lot of information here that is valuable and can be used for many different summaries to support natural resource decisions. And I'll go over some examples in 2 slides. I said I was going to summarize some example projects in 2 slides, but here I am. I deleted a few slides to save some time. So here's some example projects where we're summarizing silviculture survey or silviculture records for some forest health projects. So stem rust yield curve inputs to TSR. I believe there's a presentation in this symposium on that done by Dave Waddell. Definitely a must see, a must view. We also use forest health information to summarize survey timing in areas with stem rust. The Thompson-Okanagan drought monitoring work done by our local entomologist here. CWH VM1 Douglas fir management summary there. I believe that was for Swiss needlecast. Then we also have the identification and reporting of all damage agents around some silviculture trials that we have in our province. We also did more recently a stem rust summary in the north, stumping summary in the south, just to provide some examples of where forest health information in silviculture records has been used in the past. So how are results forest health layers accessed? There are 3 options. Folks can view the data in the results application, and that will give you right at the stand level summary. You can also request a custom report from Resource Practices Branch. That's where you'll want to roll up to a different level of blocks or silviculture openings. Please use that sparingly. There's not many of us here, but that is an option for sure. As well, and one of the most important and underutilized is the information is all available in the warehouse. And that's the BC Geographic Warehouse to all government staff as well as the public. I've provided a link to the data model so folks can see where the relationships are between the 4 layers that you will need. Several one-to-many relationships there, as well as a list of those 4 layers. So those are all options to access forest health information in results. As I mentioned in the previous slide, it's really important to understand where the information is coming from. So before using silviculture records and summarizing them, it's important to understand the sample design and methodology used in the collection of that information. That can all be found in the Silviculture Survey Manual, so there's a link there to that manual. Also important to note, because not everything surveyed is actually found in results or one of the historic systems, it's important to understand as well the submission specifications. So what information is required or what information is optional as reported to the government and now found in results. So those 2 manuals are pretty important to understanding what you're looking at. And then lastly, there's the code tables, including all your forest health damage agents and all the code tables for different species, different treatments, and that can be found in the link at the bottom. And lastly, the take-home questions that I was supposed to put in here for further discussion later. Came up with these. What opportunities are available to use silviculture survey data to better inform forest health decisions? I really, truly do think there are lots of opportunities out there. We have a lot of information, and we should be able to apply that to support many decisions that we have out there. And to also always challenge us to improve, what potential changes can be made to our silviculture surveys to better inform forest health decisions. And on the same tangent, what improvements can be made to our silviculture record keeping systems to better inform forest health decisions. I'm keen to hear what ideas folks have and have that discussion. And thank you very much for your time, and have a great morning, evening, or afternoon. Cheers.